I'm not going to be using this piece of fabric. So I'm going to cut this off. And I know you don't know this, but this pair of scissors is ancient, old, horrible. And I mean, I hate to say that about a pair of gingers because I've had them forever, but I wouldn't use them to cut out this pattern. They're very dull. This right here, these are my scissor tail scissors, and they're very, very sharp. They are weapon sharp. But again, I'm not going to use these to cut this out because I don't want to dull these blades on these sequins pieces that are plastic. So I could use these, but they're too dull and might cause problems as I'm cutting out. So my plan is to use my rotary cutter. If it can't cut it, pun intended, I will end up replacing this blade, getting a sharper blade, and then continuing to cut out because I'm not going to destroy my scissor tails and I'm not going to risk my fabric using the dull gingers. So anyway, I've cut off a piece of the fabric and I'm going to use my friction pin on this. I'm going to mark it, and see if it will remove with the heat from this fabric. I've never had a problem with it, but there's always a first time. So this is my little test piece right here. Okay, so I have the front and I have the back, and now I'm going to see what other pieces I need and how the layout looks. Okay, so this right here is my facing, and obviously I want this to match the front of the garment. So it will have to go opposite of the, yeah, that's right, I'm going this way. So this is face up, this will have to be face down so that it will match up with the front, the right side as it's being stitched and then folded under. It's having the design match at this point. You know, I'm not couture and I'm not even going to try to do that. I don't think, if I could, it would probably be too fiddly and cause me a lot of anxiety, and I just don't want that. But I am going to try to make sure that the top, which this is the top, and the bottom are about as close as I can get them in the general direction of the fabric, and I'm still kind of keeping an eye on my grain line, and I'm happy with the way this looks. And you know, if you have made a top like this or a jacket like this, or if you've even made this particular pattern, let us know in the comments below. Let us know how it went, what type of fabric you used. I'm always happy to see projects, completed projects, sort of in the middle, I'm not done yet projects. I have a lot of hope for what my mom used to call a ball up, and that was one that you would start, get frustrated, ball it up and throw it in the bottom of your closet and never look at it again until your friends convinced you that it was worth it, and then you might look at it again. Or take it to a stitch party. I used to have stitch parties and I really miss them. They were so much fun. Okay, so obviously I cannot get this sleeve to come on, to fit onto this part right here, but all is not lost, because obviously I can put the front of my, like some pieces that go to the front of my top in this area, and I can just slide my fabric down carefully. I do have this back facing that will also need to be, I believe this one's cut on the fold. Yep, so he will need to be on the fold, and I can put this, you know, in somewhere in this general area, or even just cut this off and fold it over and use that. I just don't want to lose that piece. Okay, so I'm sliding my fabric and my pattern pieces down on my cutting pinning surface, making sure that my fabric is staying lined up like I want it. All the time and care that you take to do this will pay off in the end, as you well know. Okay, and so now I can put my sleeve, and again I'm going to go face up like this so that I know I'm getting the design that I want on my sleeve. Kind of working on some of these wrinkles here. Don't really want to cut too close to that. And because this is the bottom of the sleeve, I don't really need a whole lot of sequins down here. So I'm going to check both the front and the bottom, and I'm not feeling a lot right along that line. Sleeves are not cut on the fold, so I'm just going to come out a little bit. Okay, and I've got it, I'm holding it with my hand, and I'm going to look. Okay, that's really pretty. That's a nice part of the embroidery design. Weight it down with my heavy little pin cushion. Make sure the wrinkles are out, and do some pinning. Now sometimes, especially on something where I have a line that's exactly the same, I kind of want to make sure, even though I'm visually checking to make sure that my grain line is straight, I'm also going to kind of visually check to make sure that that is straight as well, going in the opposite direction. And I'll often pin my grain line just to kind of help me. That on something like a sleeve. I just don't want it to be, as I would say if I were still in Alabama, wumpy jawed or chawed. Okay, I feel that that is at a perfect, yeah, they're right where they're supposed to be. So I'm going to come along here and pin the top of my sleeve. And I don't want to add confusion to anyone's sewing day, but you know, it's interesting. If you have a sleeve from another pattern that you know fits you well, it just fits you the way you like it to fit, you can always use that sleeve. Simplicity patterns, McCall's patterns, Butterick patterns. For some reason, I've never had a sleeve pattern from one pattern that didn't fit, unless of course it's a completely different design, like a dolman. If it's just a regular set-in sleeve like this is, I say go for it. I've done it and I have been successful 100% of the time. So now I'm going to double check and make sure that I'm not going to be cutting right. I don't have to worry about sewing on sequins down here at the bottom. And you know, if I were, I could always just get some lace tape and use that as my hem, and then this would just be the bottom edge of my sleeve, as long as it's not too long. You know, that can be trimmed. Okay, so my sleeve is on. I'm pretty happy with this. And all I've got to do is put my back facing. And honestly, I think what I'm going to do with the back facing, well, yeah, I probably ought to go ahead and use this. I don't really want a whole lot of that because it's going to be itchy. And I could use the gauze that I'm going to be using for my slacks. But, well, I don't know. I think I'll just go ahead and do it and see what happens. If I don't like it in the construction, then I'll just change it. Okay, there's not a whole lot there anyway. So, that's good. I have to place this on the fold, so it's going, let's see. Oh, I'm gonna have to do it this way. No, I'm right. I was doing it correctly. Boy, sometimes it pays to stop and think. Okay. The reason for that is these are face up. The front pieces are face up, so my facing needs to be face down. Just opposite of what the layout is showing due to my fabric choice. And as you can see, I use a lot of pins. One of the nice things about these glass head pins that are so thin is that they're just, they almost feel surgical. Like they just slide right into the fabric. There's no fighting. And they don't leave holes. Okay. All right, so we are at the cutting out phase. And I can tell you right now this blade is so dull that I'm not even gonna try to cut out until I replace this blade. So that will be in part 2, and we'll continue forth with this sewing project. Thank you for watching. Hit like if you liked it. If you have questions, please ask. Thank you. Goodbye. So I decided to use these really sharp little fiskars that I have. I went ahead and tested it on the sleeve, and it worked out just fine, and that just saves me from having to make a purchase. So I'm going to go ahead and trim out my pattern pieces. And I know we talked about markings, so there are some little arrows on your pattern pieces. A lot of times people will cut opposite of that little arrow, and that works just fine. I'll show you on this little interfacing piece. You can just make a cut that goes in the opposite direction of that little triangle so that you know where that match-up point is. Here's another one. So you can just kind of match as you're sewing with those little outcuts like that. Other people will just take their scissors and cut into it. That can be a risky little game, because if your fabric is ravelly, you could end up losing your seam allowance by doing that. I recommend either using a washable ink if the fabric is washable, or put a pin there, or use some chalk, or do something along those lines. About the only time I have ever found that little inside cut to be effective is on fabric that doesn't ravel, like fleece. And often you don't really need those types of markings on fleece. And I'm saving all my scraps because those are perfect little appliques for something, or repair for something. Okay, so this is our front for the jacket, and we're cutting out 2 pieces. And I always cut just slightly below my cutting line on my pattern pieces. That might infuriate some super seamstresses. I just feel comfortable having a little bit of wiggle room, especially on a fabric that has a built-in give. And I wanted to point that out. I think we know, based on looking at this fabric, it's got kind of that broomstick quality, and I can easily stretch it just by pulling, and it would completely distort the cut of my piece of fabric. If I were to pick this up and pull it toward me while I'm cutting, it will then shift up underneath. If I pulled it out, cut, and then it would just end up being smaller, than what I wanted. So I have to be really careful to not pull, to just not shift this at all. And additionally, I am letting my scissors just kind of be on the outer edge of that cutting line, just to make sure I'm not distorting as I cut. And thankfully these little craft scissors are very sharp. I kind of forgot that I had them. I try to keep all of my scissors, whether they're craft scissors or not, in a box, so that if I need something, I don't have to go searching in different places in the house. I don't have to be irritated that I can't find what I'm looking for. I don't want to pull this toward me, because as it's cut out I could shift it and totally change how it's laid out with this pattern piece. So I'm just trying not to move it much at all. And I know having these little tiny scissors would likely drive super seamstresses crazy, with good reason. The only reason that I'm doing this is because it is almost like a craft fabric. Under any other circumstances I'd be using a nice long, at least 8-inch scissor, but not today, not with this fabric. Okay, and I don't want to pull this toward me to get closer to it, because again, I don't want to shift my piece of fabric underneath my pattern. So I'm just going to have to go to it as I cut. Try really hard not to, and then just mess it all up there. Okay. Just kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit there. Okay, now I need to see what's going on. Yep, I'm glad I was cutting a little bit bigger, because this is folded under. Aha. There's perfect. Okay, there's a mark, a double triangle that I'm cutting out. It's sort of ironic that this is a cutting mat on top of a pool table, which has a ping pong table on top of it, because as I move around these pattern pieces, I literally feel like I'm trying to play a game of pool. But I really am enjoying, now that it's cut, I can kind of pull it free. I am enjoying the fact that this fabric seems to be behaving beautifully under the scissors. It's not shredding, it's not fraying all to pieces. It's just perfect for sort of a late afternoon, evening event, because it's not super heavy. I think it would make a gorgeous gown, to be honest. Okay, got that done. And I'm now going to pick up the whole piece. I'm not going to pull it. I'm going to pick the whole thing up to get to this piece right here. I just don't want any shifting. I'm going to check to make sure that we are still where we were. Yes, okay. No pulling. And I can tell you that I do feel a little bit of resistance now with my scissors. They're starting to have an effect from cutting through these plastic sequins. So if there was ever a reason to not use your good dressmaking shears, this is it right here. Yeah, they're starting to be stressed. But I'm happier to sacrifice these than I am my scissor tail scissors. Wish I hadn't pulled it just now, but I did. Everybody makes mistakes, I guess. Now I'm just going to kind of push my pattern down because I did pull on it. I want to make sure it's exactly where it's supposed to be. All right. So now I have the jacket back, the jacket front, your jacket front facing, the jacket back facing, and the sleeve. And I'm very, very happy to say that even with, I'm not getting the type of fraying that I was really afraid I was going to get using this fabric. It's behaving itself just magnificently in the process of being cut and handled and managed. And I still have gobs left for my top, which we will get to as soon as I have figured out what in the world I want to do as far as that side closure goes. And I may just say forget it and use a different pattern. At this point, I don't know. Cleaning up my little sequins. I do have puppies and dogs and cats, and I don't want them to choke on this. All right. Okay. So I am now needed elsewhere, and when I return, we will be sewing, and that will probably be on Monday of in the next 2 days. We'll be stitching this jacket together. We're going to see how that goes, how it feels, what we think, rate the pattern, and just go from there. But thank you for joining me.